Let me get this. There we are. I do the attendance thing by Friday, so make sure everybody signs it. Make sure it gets passed around. So far, I mean, in the first two, I only have like 2 people unaccounted for, which is good. Why don't you get yourself cozy? Of note, please, on your blackboard, I'm using this one today. I'm using this particular PowerPoint. This is from the Marie. I use these a lot. One, I'm very comfortable with them, and 2, they have great animations. So this is not necessarily the case here. And I'll marry this to the one our chapter 2, which I don't even have up there yet, from Welsh Hall. When I say our, it's those textbooks that you have. And I'll load that for you, hopefully right in between this class and the next. But we're using this one today if you're looking for it, or if you want to download it or look at it separately. Any way you want to access it, it's fine with me, because obviously you're going to be seeing it on the board. Other thing, I added a couple of these. Oh, these are not, beg your pardon. I don't know if I added them before or not. Go this way. I don't know if I put these on before or not. So, I mean, for instance, these are a couple of outlines that are probably, the skin will be, well, we will look at, but this might help you in lab, depending on, I'm sure did you finish tissues yet? Or you still do it? You did finish it. Did you start skin? Oh, and I got skin in here too. You don't have to thank me. Any charitable contributions? We call it the SFWS, Stein Fund for Wayward Steins. It's fictitious. Joking, not soliciting money from students. It's a big sign on the door, no soliciting. So moving on, that's where you'll see this, and this, if I was making up the test, which I'm not, I mean, this is the chapter, and they're all the same. Doesn't matter what textbook it is. There's all that stuff. So I put that in there for you. I forgot to do that before. I apologize. And we will begin. Moving on with the important stuff. Today, here's PowerPoint. And I mean, this is really, I don't think we really got started with this, as I recall. Inevitably, I put more content in that first, when I do a new unit with the first lecture, and then I have to start catching up with the others, because I come up with stuff I wanted to say. Notice, we're official. There is a periodic table that my colleague and I he put up, and I held it. There it is in living color. And what I'll probably try to do is maybe get, when the class is empty, or maybe get a picture of it, reduce it, and so I can hand them out to you for an example. You're not gonna have to memorize that type of stuff. It's more of a reference kind of a thing. So this is what we're starting with today. We're really that PowerPoint A that we're using is the basic chemistry, effectively understanding the basics of how things bond, the good old protons, electrons, and neutrons, orbitals, stuff that I know you had, but I want to give you the understanding as it pertains to what we're coming to in biochemistry, because we're made of biochemicals, basically. And I mean, the basic chemistry includes a lot of things that are non-organic, and we're made of those, mostly water, all the stuff that's dissolved in water, salts, and then we get into sugars, carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, which some people interchange fats and lipids. That's not exactly the way they are, and nucleotides and DNA and RNA. Those are the 4 big groups. That's all biochemistry. But understanding this basic part that we're coming to, the basic chemistry, really it all boils into a lot of what's going on with water, understanding the distinction between polar and non-polar covalent bonds, the remarkable properties of water with hydrogen bonds, what's the right term? How weak they are, but how important they are. It's sort of an interesting dichotomy. They're the weakest of all the bonds, yet maybe the most important of all the bonds, adding to the properties of water. That's interesting. So, all of it leads to this. So that's where we start. Straightforward stuff. I'm sure we touched on it, or if you haven't, somebody has. Matter. Okay, who cares? If it can, I'm not going to ask for a definition. Weight just means it means in the presence of gravity. I use the terms atomic weight or atomic mass, molecular weight or molecular mass interchangeably. I don't get excited about that. It's not something I put in as a trick question or anything like that. It doesn't make. I mean, that's silly. I have enough complexity in my questions not to have to. You know, I fool you in different ways. Challenge you would be. See, I should have said challenge. You agree? Concur. So, solid, liquid, and gas. I'm not going to ask you about changeable shapes and changeable volumes. Don't care. 3 different states of matter. Okay. Energy. Effectively, I use the term for metabolism as energy transformations. I think that's a more inclusive kind of a term, so to speak. So energy, right? Capacity to do work or put things into motion. 2 different types. We can either be storing it, and therefore it becomes what's called potential energy. You'll see that in the next slide. Or we can be using it when it's called kinetic energy. So I don't want to make this into a physics course, or certainly not a physical chemistry course. Okay. And yes, it doesn't have mass or any space. It's almost, there's almost a theoretical kind of thing, but we use it all the time. We're constantly, whatever we have ingested, and effectively what we do as a biochemical, as an organic entity, we ingest organic molecules. We have these covalent, mostly nonpolar covalent, but a fair amount of polar covalent bonds, and they are filled with energy. What makes a chemical bond is energy. Those sharing of electrons, things I know you heard about. When you share them, they store energy. So what do? We break them apart and we harvest the energy. Okay, and then when in the process of doing that, we have 2 choices. We can either use it, and if we don't use it right away, we got to store it. Very simple. And every time we do an energy transformation, we lose some of the energy as heat. And yeah, we can even borrow that and use the heat. Heat's a good thing. I mean, heat in limited fashion will help you. Basically, if you're thinking of healing a wound or dealing with an infection, that heat that's given off by the process of inflammation is effectively increasing metabolic activity. Okay, if you didn't know what heat or temperature is, definitionally it's called the average kinetic energy. So all the molecules in this room, if I hold up my hand and say, boy, it feels cool in here, okay, it's all those molecules are striking my sensors at a particular rate. We turned off the AC or closed the windows, it would warm up. Because warming up would make the collective average energy of those molecules move faster, they would strike faster. My mind would translate that as heat. That's what heat is. And so what you're doing inside the body when you generate heat is you make reactions occur more rapidly. To a certain extent, that's good. It's like anything else. The body's all about moderation. Subtle changes that it needs to make to deal with the changes in our environment. When we make drastic changes, we sometimes encounter. And it doesn't have to be necessarily life-threatening problems, but just problems. And we'll go over those as time goes on. But again, we're losing heat every time we do an energy transformation, stored. That's an animation I don't want to use. So kinetic versus potential. So kinetic energy, we have broken bonds to let loose that energy to do something, realizing we're going to lose some of it in the process. Whereas potential energy, we store it in bonds. The same way we ingest those organic materials to suck the energy out of them, we'll store some of it just in case. We store a lot of it. And really the distinction is when we start to look at metabolic activity, we look at the amount of energy that was in the system to start and the amount of energy that was in the system at the finish. If effectively we have made bonds, we have really stored energy. We've increased the stored energy. If effectively we have released energy, okay, then we have effectively broken a certain amount of bonds. And we balance those equations out, and we're doing them constantly. What's your body's energy currency? What do we spend? You and I spend a lot of dollars. Okay, what does your body spend? Three-letter word. Something you see every day. You hear every day. Science classroom. Energy currents. Begins with an A. What? Go ahead. What were you going to say? It's okay. There's no wrong answer. Pardon me? No, an interesting choice. Understand, when someone volunteers that's great. I encourage people to do that because no one in this room has made more mistakes than I have. Oh, believe me. But you learn from those. A, T, what's the last letter? T. See, you got one. All right. This is the unit where we look at it. Adenosine triphosphate. Okay, when you get to biochemistry. Believe it or not, it's absolutely true. Let's say the average, whatever your weight is, your typical weight is 120. We'll talk pounds. We'll save the kilos for later. You basically make up and break down that much energy or more in a day. If you make 150 pounds, let's say if you're 150, 125, 125 pounds of ATP, and then you break it down and you keep doing it. It is the molecule we utilize the most. It's amazing. It's the most interesting molecule probably in the body, in the sense that we use it universally. And if we haven't used it all in a minute, we have to store it, and we store it as fat. If we have to store it. If we're not putting it into bonds, we're going to store it most likely as fat. Just to give you an idea. So we have chemical energy. So chemical energy is probably that's a form of chemical energy, because we're breaking down a chemical and assembling it. Okay, we use chemical energy all the time. Most of the way our body works, in whatever pathway it's doing, whether it's assembling something or breaking down something, it's basically chemical energy. That chemical energy, we have a way of accelerating it that we'll learn about when we talk about proteins. They're called enzymes. Effectively, every biological reaction involves an enzyme. The enzyme basically minimizes how much energy we have to spend just to get the reaction to occur. It's really important. If we don't have those enzymes, or the enzymes are messed up, we see a lot of problems that are attendant to it. Where do you see a lot of those problems? And whether we get it in this part of the class, but we'll talk about some examples, would be genetics. So when we talk about someone with a genetically based disease, like cystic fibrosis, like the most common kind of muscular dystrophy, they are related to genetic irregularities or defects that cause certain enzymes not to work. Very interesting stuff. And so we'll review some of that easily as we talk into it, because I'll try to incorporate things like that. That's why we do a lot of genetic testing. We have the capability of doing that these days, of which I have a certain amount of experience with regard to that. Electrical energy. So even though that chemical, you're hearing my voice, okay? That involves a combination of mechanical energy, eardrum vibrating, and us transducing, that's the fancy word, changing that energy, losing heat, okay, in such a way that it makes electrical impulse that goes to the temporal lobe of your brain. That anatomy stuff again, temporal over here, that's where most of your auditory, your hearing capability is located. Okay, at that point, the nerves are going to, that part of your brain is going to interpret the sounds into whatever you understand of them. That involves chemical transmission as well. Nerves don't necessarily, it's not purely electrical. Your brain, your nervous system, is principally a system that relies on electrical current, but when a nerve talks to another nerve, you want to put it like that, or a nerve talks to a cell or to a gland or to an end, someplace where it's going, an organ, effectively it releases chemicals to do that. They are called neurotransmitters. We spent at the last quarter of our class is all about the nervous system. And that's very much of an integral part to understand these neurotransmitters. And as we go on, you'll learn about it. Just to give you some context for what this is all about, electromagnetic, that's very much physics. That's there. And we'll talk a little bit about, as we get over time, about certain kinds of energy, when we begin to look at what we call ionizing and non-ionizing radiation, you get that reiterated or reviewed specifically in microbiology. We use this all the time. We use it therapeutically, we use it scientifically, we use it to sterilize things, to basically, and they're used constantly all the time. I heard you dissect it in lab, the people have lab. I'm sure that in order to do that, you probably had a scalpel and you probably had a pair of scissors. Scalpel, did you put a new blade on that scalpel? They were already on there. Did anybody see where the blades came from? In an aluminum packet, okay? Sealed aluminum packet that is sterilized with radiation. So I always, when I do dissections in my lab, I typically put new blades on. Dr. Robbins may have put them on initially because I don't like students until I show them how to put the blades on. You can get cut and they get an instant report minute. So we use radiation. There's a lot of radiation that's used, and people kind of cringe. Oh, if I touch it, am I going to get sick? No, you're not. It has dissipated. You sterilize the internal portion. The radiation has dissipated over time, etc. So we convert it from one form or another. That's all we're doing. And again, in the process, we're losing it as heat, which we can use. Which brings us to the basics, so to speak. Before we get into the periodic table, yes, all of those are elements. They're all made up of identical atoms. That's what makes them an element. And each of those atoms have the same physical and chemical properties. That's why I was a little sketchy on the last PowerPoint, because they didn't talk enough about physical properties. Physical properties are important. Okay? So all matter is composed of elements that can, and they can't be broken down. If you break down an element or the atoms that it is made out of, then they lose their identity. That's the idea. That's the emergent properties thing. Us, 4 major elements: C, H, O, and N. These are the ones you should know: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. I had that on the board on Friday. Probably told you a little bit about it. Right? Ringing a bell? I'm old. I forget stuff. It just drives me crazy when I forget. You'll see when I forget anything, it bothers me. And after that, we have calcium and phosphorus. And you'll see that when we look at those. So the 4 major ones, 96%. Then you have what we call minor elements, most authors. And then you have these guys that there's very little of. We call them trace elements. That doesn't minimize their importance. The fact that they're a trace element doesn't make them unimportant. If anything, we need such a small amount, it really underscores the importance, because in larger amounts, there can be problems that are there. And yeah, that's the periodic table. We're going to get to that in a second. So here are the atoms. Yeah, they're unique because they have an identity specifically. All the properties, the tiniest particles, I'll buy that. So here they acknowledge physical and chemical properties. And then, I'm sure you've had these. Typically, they're from Latin roots that are there. For instance, some of these you're going to understand. Okay, like down when you talk about the heart, you're going to hear about something called atrial natriuretic peptide. Okay, which is the acronym is AN as in Nancy, P. Natri means sodium. It's something that causes your body to expel sodium, and whenever you expel sodium in the urine, water follows it. I like to call that Stein's. Mary had a little lamb. Wherever sodium goes, water is sure to follow. Mary, lamb. That's all right. You're forgiven. The last class, if we didn't know what curds and whey were, they forgot Muffet and Tuffet, and I know you would have forgotten that. There's a reason why this stuff is important, and you thought they were just telling you stuff. It's important. Natrium. You don't use, for K, you hear potassium, but they talk about the K. They don't use the Latin word. CHON, remember those, along with the next 2, calcium and phosphorus. And then you can see the potassium has a role. The sulfur. You'll see when we talk about that, they all have a lot of roles that are there. Believe me, I don't want to say that things like potassium, magnesium, And then we get down here to these trace elements, starting here, magnesium, iron, and iodine. Here's iron, Fe, and iron, and iodine. Vital to understand. Your thyroid doesn't work without iodine. Your blood doesn't carry oxygen without iron. Biggest problem that we see in typical bloodstream problem is anemia. That means not enough red blood cells or red blood cells that don't work the way they're supposed to. The most common reason, iron deficiency. Either you're not getting iron in your diet or you have a reason why you can't incorporate it. We get into that in AP2. That's when we look at the blood. And then and all of these trace elements have different things. Those aforementioned enzymes generally need a little bit of each one of these. And a lot of times it helps the protein hold its shape. That's what iron does. Hemoglobin is able to adopt its characteristic shape because it has iron incorporated with it. And again, you look at that in AP2 when you talk about heme, which is made of organic material, and it has iron in it. And so you all knew this anyway. I don't know what an atomic mass unit is. It's not a lot because atoms are really super tiny. So I'm not going to ask him. It's got a weight of 1 unit. Neutrons have a weight of 1 unit, no charge. How much is the charge? I wouldn't know it in voltage or nanovolts or picovolts or whatever it's measured in. Wouldn't have an idea. Because I don't do physics. I don't do plants other than for cooking. And I don't do teeth. Everything else I'm pretty good at. And then electrons have mass. It's just not measurable. So we discount it. So when we get to that periodic table over there, and if you're close enough to take a look at it, you can catch it. Find anyone online. You all know that hydrogen has 1 proton and 1 electron. It's the only one that doesn't come normally, the neutron. So you would think it would have an atomic mass related to 1, but no, 1.008, and it's not the electron. You can't measure 1 electron. Too small. Helium has 2 protons and 2 neutrons. It should be 4. It has only 2 electrons, but it's 4.003. And all of these are like that. Carbon, over here, 6 protons and 6 neutrons, not 12, but 12.01. Either carbon can't add, but there's something else. And the something else is we find irregularities in the number of neutrons. All atoms, ergo all elements, have variations that occur in nature where they have a different number of neutrons. And even in the case of hydrogen, where we add 1 to it, or 2 to it, as you will see shortly. So the neutrons are very significant. They create different types that have the same chemical properties, but different physical properties. Because it still behaves the same as we'll look at it. And that's the really important distinction to understand chemical versus physical properties. I know I'm repeating myself. So balanced by the number of negative electrons, I'll buy that. Protons and neutrons are in the nucleus, I'll buy that. Okay, and there's all these models, but to keep it as simplistic as possible, if you understand hydrogen, pretty straightforward. Hydrogen has, and helium, we'll use those 2. Hydrogen in its nucleus has a proton. I'll just make it. Its outermost orbital, that's the nucleus, it has an electron. That's good old hydrogen, the atom. Hydrogen, the atom. Helium. Why am I using these 2? Because they're odd ones. They're odd because that electrons go around in what we call traditional orbitals. It's a little more, it's not quite so simple. Helium has a nucleus that has 2 plus 2, And surrounding that cluster, there's two protons. It has, and I'll use their diagram, two electrons. That's its outermost. Everything that happens chemically is about the outermost orbital. Hydrogen and helium are the oddballs because they're the first orbital, and you only have two electrons. It's small. There's a nucleus just spinning around. All the other ones that I'm sure you've heard this have a 10. Everything in that table, with regard to its chemical properties, is based on the number of electrons in the outermost orbital. And you've heard this before, I'm sure. If it has 8, it's maxed out. Okay? If it has, let's say it has 7, it's looking to find an electron. That would be like chlorine. It's looking in the worst way to find it. I got 7, I need 8. Because you want to either fill your outermost orbital, get rid of it. It's a lot easier to find 1 than to lose 7. The flip side of that is sodium. Sodium has 1 extra, so does lithium. All those ones in red over there are lithium, sodium, potassium, vanadium, cesium, and frank. All of those guys have 1 out of 8. You give up, that electron disappears. You never find them. Sodium is explosive metal. My chemistry class, those many years, they had a jar with kerosene covering this block of grayish stuff. Look like a piece of chalk. Jar. And what we would do, we learned about it. The teacher would go in and get like a little mini chisel, long stem, get a little piece out and drop it in the tiniest thing you imagine, a big beaker of water. We'll go boom. It's an explosive metal. It explodes when it's exposed to air because there's moisture in air or water. They just don't have it now in classrooms. It's explosive, dangerous. That doesn't. It's rare to find those. But I point out these guys. They're interesting. Hydrogen, like anyone with just 1 electron, is very happy to lose it. See it. There it goes. Take it out here, we'll put it over here. What does that leave us for? So initially, hydrogen had a proton and an electron. If it loses said proton, so it said electron, what's left? A proton. All that's left. Another name for that is H+, hydrogen ion. And you will hear, when you hear about the proton motive force, that is hydrogen ions moving. That's basically all that ATP gets generated by the movement of those hydrogen ions. So don't call it the hydrogen ion force because the terms are interchangeable. When we talk about pH, pH stands for the percent of hydrogen ion concentration. So that's what acidity and alkalinity or basicity are all about. Your body is governed by those. All those proteins and enzymes I was talking about, they start to lose their shape. Shape is everything. If you have it the wrong pH, your body's ultra sensitive to that. If someone's acidotic, they're in trouble. Big trouble. You got to work on that now. Not, give them something, we'll see them in the morning. No. Okay? So understand. That's what I'm trying to point out with this. Let you know that, first of all, this is where we commonly find hydrogen ions. The other thing that they do, something you should appreciate, is we have that positive. We have another one next door. We have 2 hydrogens, and what happens is share. When you share, you create a chemical bond. This is one of those aforementioned non-polar covalent bonds. Actually, there's a lot of energy that goes in holding it together. We can write it as H2, which happens to be room temperature a gas. It is chemically speaking relatively stable. Physically speaking, it is not stable. Helium, same thing, much more chemically stable. It's also a gas. We don't have to write it, we can just put a little G under it to let it know it's a gas. But the reality is, it's not explosive. Talk about that previously? Did you do the hydrogen helium thing? Anybody? No? How do we know that? What was a famous example of hydrogen exploding? 1937. I wasn't there. Don't ask. My mom, I was in Lakehurst or Lakewood, New Jersey. I always forget which one it is. Probably 50 miles south of where my mom was born and grew up in Newark, New Jersey, about 20 minutes from New York City. She could see the sky light up in this explosion. Everybody. No, 1937. 9/11 was big too. 1936 was 2011. My wedding anniversary. 9/11/13. That's I can't forget. You forgot. I can't justify. It is what happened. Did anybody hear of what a dirigible named Hindenburg? 1937 blew up, hydrogen gas. Why it blew up as it was about to land is an interesting historical uncertainty. We were at the onset of World War II. That was the German dirigible. There was some question about whether there were spies involved. There's some question whether it was impacting atomic energy, which was its infancy. By that time, I think Einstein was or was about to immigrate here to the United States. Eventually died and taught at Princeton, New Jersey. Nobody knows for sure. I've read a lot. I love reading. I've read a lot of interesting sort of historical fiction, if you will, that's generally couched in a little bit. There's a certain amount of uncertainty. And that's why when you see the blimp over the stadium, as you will a few times this year, okay, or any of those, that's filled with helium. Because helium doesn't explode. It doesn't make it, like so terrible. Actually, could still happen. But at least not one of those explosions that are there. It's interesting, the construction. There's been a couple of good movies made about that over the years. They're kind of interesting. Okay? Kind of interesting. So, when we look at this kind of stuff, planetary models versus orbital models, okay? Planetary models, now I don't really care. I was showing you the orbital model. The biggest problem with those models, okay, is this. It's two-dimensional. To understand, it's not easy to do. It's a gift if you can do it easily. To be able to think of things three-dimensionally. How things, because the body's not two-dimensional in nature. Shape is everything. This is probably a better model. Here's helium. Okay, we used to think the electrons traveled in pairs. They don't. We would draw two of them together when I was in school. Oh, they're in pairs. They're happy. Here, they're drawing them separately. The reality is this is probably better. What electrons are circling that nucleus, and at any point in time, if you would, effectively, it would be electrically neutral. Okay. If we see an irregularity, if the electrons are pulled to one side or the other, that's going to create a charge or an irregular charge. We're actually going to see that when we get to water. Okay, so here the density is, and everything is about that is density. Now, I was telling the other class the same thing, and shape is so important. We're going to talk about that. I mean, it's very, if you want to think symmetrical, symmetry is so important. We are a bilateral and symmetrical entity. When we want to check for irregularities, well, you'll see, in the old days before they had the blue tent in football and in different sports, they do field tests for concussions. I mean, all that idea of shining, the blue tent's easier because you can get that little pen light that everybody carries in their pocket, okay, and be able to bring it this way. When it comes close, your eyes will constrict. Not just the side it's coming from, but both sides. They'll constrict equally. And then when you pull it away, they'll dilate equally. It doesn't come whether you come from this side because you test both. So it should be bilateral and symmetrical. That's part of the neurological examination. Pupils are equal and reactive to light. If we see asymmetry, if one is sluggish or if one is unusually brisk, significant. If you have patient, squeeze your hand. Take my hand, your hands in mine, and squeeze as hard as you can. Are you squeezing as hard as you can? You sure on this side? And if one side is perceptibly different, something's off. When you see irregularities and symmetry, it's very important. So symmetrical things mean something in the context of understanding the body. So I kind of like the cloud theory made more sense to me. Okay, and here we are. So it's pretty straightforward. The number of protons is the atomic number, the big one. The mass or number or weight, who cares, is the adding of protons and the neutrons, because electrons don't contribute to that party. And then we have isotopes, iso and topes. Iso for same, I think of type. So it's the same atom, it's just got different stuff in it. So here's a classic example. Again, hydrogen in its essence, in the vast, tremendous majority, are protons and an electron. A proton and a electron. Here's helium, and here's lithium. But each one of these in nature, we talked about carbon 14. Carbon is 6 and 6. There's carbon 13 and there's carbon 14. What's interesting about 14, not that it's dangerous to you, it very slowly is releasing radiation. So it's basically, at that point, it's decomposing to carbon 13. We can actually measure that because we have stuff that we dated made out of carbon. We know historically the date. We know what it's like now. We know what it's like 500 years, 1,000 years. And we set up basically a formula that's not a whole lot different than how they figure out your mortgage or your car payment. Okay? It's a logarithmic type of formula. I wouldn't attempt to do it. Something our math department people will do all the time. And effectively, what they are able to do with that is plug in the numbers of how much, what the day is now, how much carbon 14 is in it, basically, and you can project backwards how old it is, or come forward, how, from either direction. That's what carbon dating is about. Because some of these have an impact on the physical properties. We call that a radioactive isotope. We use them all the time in science. We use radioactive iodine in very, very tiny amounts to both examine the thyroid as a contrast material with scans. So the scan itself, now you might have to put something else there that it can be tracked. And iodine being a fairly heavy metal, okay, fairly heavy element, the x-rays don't penetrate it particularly well. Ages ago, when you used to inject dye into arteries, and they still do it, or into veins to do a scan, they used to do an arteriogram, we'd inject iodine. It wasn't radioactive, and take an x-ray, and you'd have a white line tracing it. In the old days, that's how we figured out if somebody had a blockage, if they needed surgery or things like that. There are more sophisticated ways to do it now, because that's a fairly invasive. Injecting that stuff could break up a clot. My dad had it done back, very shortly before he died, in heart surgery in 1988. Why are they doing something that could kill him? Because if he didn't do the surgery, he would have had no chance to survive, even though he did not. Just to give you some idea of how things have changed and evolved in medicine over time. So that same iodine called I-131, we can use to treat in larger amounts thyroid cancers. We use something called technetium-99. Technetium is another one of these things, and radioactively we could take that and bond it to elements in the blood. And that's what we use: brain scans and bone scans, liver spleen scans. So in other words, we can find out whether or not your bone is healing, whether there's a bone tumor, whether there's a particular type of arthritis, all from those. And it's been around for a long time. We don't have to use it. We don't have to use a Geiger counter. We have a scanner that effectively functions. So you have to use enough so it's not dangerous, but it exists. So as we go there, here's the way they script it. I'm not going to ask you that. Whether it's a subscript or a superscript. I would, but I don't know how to do those on Word. So I can't do that. No, I wouldn't do that. And so here they are: structural variations, physical properties, neutrons. So carbon 14 is an example. The average of mass numbers of all forms is why we have that variation. Why it's not 1 or 4 or 12. Okay, so here we are. So you all know what water is, right? H2O. So if we have what we call deuterated water, it can be D2. All that means is we have, and we have to do this typically, you something like extracting and then doing laboratory or factory. We make deuterated water. So effectively, all the only hydrogen ions we're using, deuterium ions, they have the same, they'll bond to the O just as easily, but they will. Reality that the water will be different physically. What would be different about that water? If you added an extra neutron to every, quote, hydrogen that was in water, what would it make? What would happen to that water? It's got an extra neutron. Neutrons have mass or weight, but they don't have any charge. So if you add extra weight, what kind of water would you have? How would you describe the water? Tasting water? No, it tastes the same. Cloudy water? No, it looks the same. You add something. So what I did this morning that I always dread doing, just before I get dressed. There's this item on the floor in the bathroom that I step on. Which would be a, go ahead, a scale. So what would happen? What am I dreading? Yeah, and so what would you call something that weighs more? It would be light or it's heavy water, yes! Why is that important, sir? See, I'm taking you back. Heavy water in nuclear reactions, and I don't know if they're still used today. When they started experimenting with atomic energy in the effort to build an atomic bomb as a weapon of war, it was in World War II. That was something they were doing before the onset of World War II. And at that point, the Nazi Germany, the Allied, the Axis forces had invaded Norway, and they made it in a factory in Norway. We traced it because we know it, because of all the heat that was generated, they had to use heavy water in those experiments. If they used regular water, it would make so much steam it would evaporate so quickly, it would destroy the experiment they were working on. We were aware of it. We traced, because of spies and Norway, they had a very, very active resistance. Okay, put their lives on the line, lost their lives many times, to give that information to the Allies, so they were able to follow trucks of heavy water into Germany, found out exactly where the plant was that they were making the atomic bomb, and they bombed it. The war ended before they were successful. They had V-2 rockets out of them. Those were the first precursor to intercontinental ballistic missiles. And indeed, our whole rocket program involved German scientists who were working on that project, particularly a guy named Werner von Braun. History. See, and you thought those classes were important. To understand the relevance of these things, you have to give it context, I think. Okay, and so here's the nugget about radioactivity, detected in measures with scanners. It's still, okay, the isotope, sometimes it's a different element, and sometimes it stays the same. Most of the time it stays the same, but what happens if it's losing, like carbon-14 is still carbon. The oddball thing is this one. Here you have something that we can use. Again, we can use these radioactive molecules. You see them advertised on TV now. There's one they're advertising for either prostate cancer. Okay, well, for years they were using radium implants and things like that to gradually utilize radioactivity to destroy tissue. It's not a good thing, but it's an accepted treatment. We need better treatments, to be very honest with you. Here's one. Radon. Radon is something, when we sold our house, well, most of the homes around here were built on areas that were strip mined relentlessly for years. Okay, looking for coal and other minerals that were there. And then they were filled in. And so our home was in O'Hara Township, if you know where that is. At the time, we were in Fox Chapel Schools. We're close to Millvale and Shaler on that side of O'Hara. And effectively, when we sold that home back in 2000, we had to do a radon test. We were radon positive, turned out. It was giving out enough radon that was measurable. We had to either lower the price by the cost of doing or provide radon mitigation. We could pay for it ourselves or just lower the cost of the house and let the new buyers, which is what we did. It's easier. And to mitigate it, they would put an exhaust fan in the basement, run a pipe up to the roof and spit it out in the atmosphere. I don't know why that's such a better way to do it, but it takes it out of the house. That's what it was. So, I mean, it's something, if you're going to live around here or any area, it's pretty much mandatory to do radon. You probably should have a radon detector in your basement in any event, just to know, because you might have people who are more susceptible. Okay, so same chemistry as their stable isotopes. Okay, diagnosis of disease, radioactivity, etc. Again, molecules are just that. Two of the same is a molecule. Two or more different are compounds. If they're the same, whether it's O2 or H2 or N2, those are molecules. Carbon dioxide, CO2, is a molecule. It's also a compound because they're both different. This is the classic carbohydrate. The name that you will learn, and we do this later, is called a hexose. Hexose, hex, 6. Ose is the suffix for sugar. So it's a 6-carbon sugar. Carbohydrates mean effectively equal parts carbon and water. When you do the math, you have 6 carbons. 6 times H2 is 12. 6 times 2 is 6. And so you see when we get to that, how we can represent that. That's all part of it. That's there. I'll stop here. Rather than start this, the only class I got through is the first one. So I'll probably review it with them and make sure we start it with you folks. Thank you very much. See everybody Friday. Make sure everybody signs in. Like I said, by Friday afternoon, I have to give them this information. This registrar, they're very insistent. And the only way I know if you're here is if you sign it. I count, but I don't know who's here or who's not. Yes. Sign-in sheet. Where is said sign-in sheet? Did it get passed around? Yeah. Who's got it? They have to do the box. Everybody in here better sign it. You didn't sign it yet. Did it disappear magically? Let's get with it. It's the only way I know if people are here. No, I said from the first class. Typically they have, it's 9 o'clock, coffee. Yeah, you're welcome. ¿Dónde está el sign-in sheet? It's allí. It's over there. My Spanish is getting better.